Welcome to the 2022 Black Reading Month Author Talk number 3. We are so pleased to have our sister Nubia Kai with us tonight. We're going to do a proper introduction for her in just a little while. But I'll start for those who may not know me. My name is Malik Yakini. I'm one of the founders of the September is Black Reading Month campaign. And for a number of years, ran a bookstore in Detroit, Black Star Community Bookstore. And I have an intense interest in Black people being familiar with the literature that has come out of our own historical and cultural experience. I want to say just a few words about Black Reading Month for those who might be new to the concept. The September is Black Reading Month campaign was founded in 1980 by Helen Ray, Nkiruka Yakini, David Rambo, Osei Nkele, and myself. It was designed to promote the reading of Black books, magazines, newspapers, and journals. Annual Black Reading Month activities included book fairs, writing contests, lectures, and book signings and reading contests. The Black Reading Month Committee's slogan, "Black reading is crucial for Black survival," speaks to the necessity of being grounded in our own history and culture if we are to survive and thrive in the world. September, when most students go back to school, was chosen as a time to annually reinforce the importance of Black reading to members of our community. It's our hope that the habit that develops in September will carry on throughout the rest of the year. In 1985, Mama Nubia Kai introduced the Turn Off the TV campaign as part of the annual Black Reading Month observance. Participants in the campaign are asked to go for the entire month of September without watching television and to read at least one book by a Black author. Over the past 3 years, Black Reading Month activities have gone online due to the COVID pandemic. Community members are asked to post pictures of Black books that they're reading on the September is Black Reading Month Facebook page. And for the 3rd year, we're presenting a series of online author talks with prominent authors for Black Reading Month. Welcome to tonight's 3rd author talk of 2022. I want to just explain the format to you before we get into it. And I'm sure once we get to rolling, it's going to be like 90 miles an hour because Nubia has so much information, so much insight. But what we're going to do is I'll have a conversation with Nubia for about 45 minutes. And I have some things I think we might talk about, but we're also going to have an organic conversation and we'll just see where it leads. At about 8 o'clock, we're going to open up for questions from the participants. And what you can do is put your question in the chat. I'll read the question to Nubia and then she can respond to it. It can be either a question or a comment. In a few days, we'll post the videotape of this session so that it can be viewed by many more people who are actually registered for the webinar this evening. So having said that, I'd like to introduce our sister Nubia Kai. Nubia Kai, also known as Nubia Kai El Nura Salam. I didn't know that was your whole name, El Nura, the light. Received a Bachelor's of Arts degree from Wayne State University in Anthropology and Black Studies, a Master's of Arts degree from the University of Wisconsin in African Languages and Literature, and a Ph.D. in African Literature and Film from Howard University. A poet, playwright, storyteller, and novelist, Ms. Kai has won numerous awards for her writing, including 3 Michigan Council of the Arts Awards, 5 DC Commission of the Arts Awards, 2 National Endowment for the Arts Awards, and the Larry Neal Writers Competition for Poetry. She's published in Black Scholar, Black World, Essence Magazine, Black American Literature Forum, Quilt, Catalyst, Solid Ground, City Arts Quarterly, Obsidian, Black Books Bulletin, Moving Out, Journal of Black Poetry, Left Curve, Journal of African Literature Association, Black Camera, Journal of African American History, and several other journals and anthologies. She's published 2 collections of poetry, Piece of My Mind and Solos, a collection of short stories, The Sweetest Berry, on my mind, and I'm sorry, The Sweetest Berry on the Bush, and a historical novel, I Spread My Wings and I Fly, and a scholarly text, Kuma Malinke Historiography, Sunjata Keita to El Mami Samori Torre. Her plays have been produced at the New Federal Theater, Penumbra Theater in St. Paul, Minneapolis, the Twin Cities area, ETA Theater in Chicago, the Creative Express Theater with Sister Dorothy Robinson in Detroit, Tafari Jinrani Theater in Atlanta, and she has taught history at George Washington University and was an assistant professor at Howard University's Department of Theater Arts and an adjunct professor at University of Maryland-Baltimore's Africana Studies Department. My sister, peace, Sister Nubia Kai, welcome. Take yourself off mute. You're on mute.
Sorry.
Still? Okay, great.
Yeah, thank you very much, Malik. Thank you so much for the invitation. I feel honored to be here.
You know, I was thinking today, trying to think back when I first met you, and I actually think before I met you, the summer of 1975, I was working in Vaughn's bookstore in Detroit, and your book was, I think, Piece of My Mind, I think was the name of it, was in Vaughn's bookstore.
Wow.
So before I actually met you,
that.
I saw your book and I was familiar with you. And then I remember seeing you riding your bike in Highland Park when you were living on Glendale, and you'd always have on a long skirt and had your head wrapped. And so those are some of my earliest memories of you. So it's great to still be in community with you.
Yes, it is. Great to be alive too.
Absolutely. So you've lived in Washington, D.C. for the last several years, but you are a Detroiter. I think that would be fair to say. You were born and raised in Detroit, and I'm sure you carry Detroit with you wherever you go on the planet.
Yes,
can we talk about what your childhood was like growing up in Detroit? What was the Detroit you knew like as a child?
Okay. Before I begin, I would like to dedicate this this particular session to our great brother who passed away on August 13th. Speaking of Aaron Ibn Pori Pitts, I'd like to dedicate this show this evening to him in honor of him and memory of him, because today also is the 40th day of his ascension. And as you know, in Africa, in the Caribbean, in our culture, actually, the 40th day of the ascension, the 40th day after the passing of a person, was a very important time. So I'd like to, again, just take note of that and extend my prayers and ask that he rest in bliss. And, you know, yes, yeah, that he make his transition and rest in bliss.
If we can take just a minute, because many people who are watching us or who will watch us may not know who Ibn is. I hesitate to say was, because his spirit and creativity are still with us. But can you talk just for a minute about your brother and my brother, Ibn Pori, Aaron Ibn Pori Pitts?
Oh, sure. Yeah, Aaron Ibn Pori Pitts, who we in the cultural community simply call Ibn Pori, was a artist, a graphic artist, photographer, videographer. He was a poet, he was a publisher, he was a revolutionary. He was a brother who was just 100% of his time was devoted to the revolution and advancement, the elevation of people of African descent. I could go on and on. He was a member of the Black Panther Party out in California at the very early period of his formation. He was actually an icon in the Black arts movement because he was working with some of the pioneer journals, like the journal Black Poetry. It was one of the earliest poetry journals. He was a graphic artist and poet with that journal. When he comes back to Detroit, he gets involved with the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, where he was involved in putting out the newspaper there. He was also part of the, I think it was the Socialist Workers Party. So he's a brother who was involved in a number of organizations. He was also very active in the arts with the National Council of Conference of Black Artists. He was a former president of the branch in Detroit. So, as I said, he's really like an icon. He's the icon in the Black arts movement and one of our great revolutionary brothers. Very, very kind, compassionate, giving person. He was certainly known for just giving, and helping anybody in need. So that's our brother, Ibn Pori Pitts.
Ashe, 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 and it was a beautiful Jubilee birthday celebration homegoing for him this past Saturday that Nubia played a role in. She was kind of behind the scenes, but I sense she was one of the primary organizers of that. So we will always call our brother Ibn's name as we're pouring libation, and we will continue to be inspired by his good works. So Sister Nubia, tell us about growing up in Detroit.
Growing up in Detroit, at the time that I grew up in the 1950s and 60s, was a wonderful place, really. I think Detroit was even known as being one of the better places for Black people to live at that time. You had, of course, Detroit is known for the auto industry. Many of our brothers were working in the plants, and they made enough money to take care of their entire family. So something I didn't realize existed in other cities. When I was growing up, most of the women were stay-at-home mothers. And I understand that was not the case in a lot of other cities. My mother was an exception, but my grandmothers, my aunts, most of them were stay-at-home mothers. Families were very close-knit. Our neighbors were like family members. We were as close to our neighbors as we were to our family members. We had all kinds of picnics and baseball games and family reunions, and there was this Black culture, even though we weren't conscious of it. But for example, everybody had to take piano lessons in our family. That was as important as learning reading, writing, and arithmetic. It was not an extracurricular activity, it was mandatory. So growing up, again, surrounded with music, my mother was Parks and Recreation teacher, as one of your aunts. In fact, one of your aunts, I think, would work with my mother. So it was a very, very good 50s and 60s. It was a wonderful, wonderful time.
So as a child, were you a reader?
I really didn't start reading, not as a child. I really started reading, well, I take that back. I did start reading, when we first, in the third grade, I remember that I started doing a lot of reading, but then I got away from it. But then I kind of got reinterested in reading when I was really exposed to literature. In this case, it was Euro-American literature, but being exposed to really good literature, I really started reading, I would say, around the 11th and 12th grade. I kind of just cut off the TV and started doing a lot of reading. And that's what kind of led me into wanting to write, is reading good literature, good, poetry, novels, stories, plays. That kind of garnered my interest in writing. And I would say that, okay, yeah, okay, there was a poetry series here, and that I had participated in once, and the host of that series always asks the poet, did poetry find you, or did you find poetry? And I guess with me, it kind of happened both ways. Initially, it was, I found poetry, by reading, the reading that I was doing in school, and then even outside of school. I found poetry, but then poetry found me through the Black arts movement. And when poetry found me, that's when I was able to find my voice, my true voice. Because with Black arts came the Black identity and Black consciousness. And that kind of gave me the voice and really helped to hone me as a poet. So I found poetry, but I really became a poet when poetry found me through Black arts.
And so you're kind of a child of the Black arts movement. I don't know if I should say child, but you were probably a teenager, I think would be fair to say, probably, right?
Right, yeah. I
Uh,
mean, exactly. I think I came out of the womb, I would say, of the Black arts movement. You
so
know,
I
my
wonder if you can talk
consciousness.
about that time period. And in fact, I want you to talk about three things. The influence of the Black arts movement, you changing your name to Nubia, because probably I assume that's not the name your parents gave you, and also your adoption of Islam. So if you can talk about those three things and maybe how those influenced the trajectory of your life.
Of your life, okay. Um, okay, okay, if you can go back, I'm thinking of when you say the name change. And the name change, that's very interesting because the name change, I didn't really change my name. Somebody gave me that name, and that kind of comes into Poetry Found Me. I was given the name by a very, very dear friend who also passed away recently. His name was Abu Ishaq, and he wrote a poem. And in the poem, he's calling me Nubia. And so that kind of became my name. And to be honest, at the time that they started calling me Nubia, you know, I was still telling people my slave name. You know, it's like I didn't fully accept it at first. And I kind of had to grow into it. And that's what happened. I kind of grew into the name, but I didn't even really accept the name at first. So again, I got my name again from a poem that was written. Your other question, the period of time, that time period, as they say, Black arts, or as Larry Neal brilliantly pointed out in the anthology that he and Mir Baraka did, Black Fire, he called Black arts the spiritual and aesthetic arm of the Black Power movement or the Black Liberation movement. So the Black Liberation movement and the Black arts movement kind of were tied together. In fact, the Black arts movement, again, was the spiritual aesthetic arm. So almost everybody who was involved in Black arts was also involved in some level in the social and political activities that were going on. So I also became a revolutionary. I wasn't in any particular party. You know, even though I had friends, we had friends in the Black Panther Party, in the Republic of New Africa, and we were kind of doing a lot of the artistic things. We would perform at different events that the Panthers gave, or the Republic of New Africa gave, and we were hitting a lot of clubs, coffee houses, and things that were up. We were reading poetry everywhere, reading poetry on the streets. So it was just a lot of activity. You had a lot of theater companies that were popping up everywhere, a lot of community theaters. So almost everybody in the movement, involved in the Black Power movement, whatever organization, they were also in some way involved in the arts, whether it was music, a lot of people started acting, a lot of people started writing poetry. It was just something that, again, that came with the Black consciousness, was Black creativity and Black arts. So it was all connected, it was all tied together at the time. And at that time, when we talk about Islam, Islam was also at the center of that. The influence of Malcolm X, I mean, that group brought a lot of people into the Nation of Islam, but those of us who didn't go into the nation, because the nation, you know, had their limitations and restrictions, especially with artists. So I noticed a lot of the artists tend to move more towards Orthodox Islam or Sunni Islam. Sunni Muslims became Sunni Muslims. So I guess you could say that's where I went. But at that time, Islam was because the Quran clearly says we have a right. In fact, we have a duty to defend ourselves when we're oppressed. So we saw revolution and Islam is coming kind of, you know, as being one, right? And so that was the other reason. And actually, I was part of a African tribal family that was called the Bay family. And we were really into cultural nationalism, right? You know, reclaiming our heritage, many of the values and principles that we had been cut off from in Africa. We're reclaiming that, with the African names, the African dress, doing things like even sitting on the floor, eating with our hands, not kind of eschewing the obsession with material wealth. That was part of the Bay family, kind of living communally and sharing our wealth and resources.
Who are some other members? Who are some other members of the Bay family?
Yeah, well, everybody, Farouk Zide, the great musician, jazz musician here, based in Detroit, was nationally recognized. Sadiq Bey, who's back in Detroit now, he's living in Germany for a while. He was a wonderful, wonderful poet and musician. Abu Ishaq, who, as I said, passed away earlier this year. He passed away in May of this year, and who gave me my name. He was part of the family. Some people may remember the name Slip Campbell, who was a well-known poet and revolutionary, who has also passed away. He was called Jalilu when he changed his name, but those were some of the people. There's another man, Basha Bey, and we had a chance to see his daughter at the homegoing for Ibn on Saturday. Aisha Ellis is the daughter of Basha Bey, and I remember when she was a baby, of course she wouldn't remember me, but these were just some of the people. Salim Bey also, who became Imam of the Muslim community here. He was also a member of the Bey family. He also passed away, I think, last year. So many of them, I think many of them have passed on, and some of the women also. But that was the Bey family, and so we kind of all became Muslim together in one, in one evening. And the guy came through and he was talking, and we kind of like, okay, and we were interested. We were studying various African religious traditions at the time anyway. And we, at that time, we understood it as an African tradition. And then, of course, people got away thinking, oh, this is just, but we understand that I understand clearly that it is an African tradition. The Prophet Muhammad, all of the followers are Black. And people think the Arabs are white, when the real Arabs, people of Saudi Arabia, are just branches of Nubian and Ethiopian people. And even today, 80% of the country is Black, but they don't show you that. They show you these people that they brought in. This was done when the British took control or took protective rights for Saudi. But again, we're thinking that it's another instance of stolen legacy. The Arabs that we call Arabs today were really come into the picture much, much later, with the movement of Europeans into the Middle East during the Crusades. And many of them stayed there and began to adopt the religion and the culture and the language. And so they're known as the real Arabs. And you have all these Afro-Arabs in the Sudan, in Chad, in Eritrea, Somalia, Ethiopia, and not to mention even in West Africa, where they have been integrated into different African groups like the Fulani, the Hausa, the Mandinka, the Soninke, the Hausa. But again, we don't realize that these are the real people. So again, in fact, all of what they're calling the major Western religions are really the major African religions, and that's something I'm working on now. Christianity begins as a Pan-African anti-imperialist movement against the Romans.
So Nubia, you mentioned that poetry found you during the Black Arts movement. How old were you, and when you first started writing poetry, what was your early poetry about?
When I first started writing poetry, I guess I was maybe 18 when I first started writing the first poem. I think it was in high school. Again, I had no knowledge of Black literature or Black history. So I was inspired by the kind of literature that we got in school, right? And so I was writing poetry about the beauty of music and nature and things like that. I remember there's a poem by Nikki Giovanni where she talks about you know, writing about the trees and the this and the that, but it's like, you know, there are no trees in front of my house. So how am I going to write about trees? So it was this one. So I'm writing about something that's really not related to me and not related to, yes, but just feelings, right, about my love of music and my love of nature. But like I said, with Black arts, then the poetry started to change as well, because now I'm writing about the social political conditions under which we live. I'm talking about gaining love for my people and my culture, and love for myself as a Black woman. You know, it changes with the consciousness changing.
So I'm wondering, Nubia, can you read us something from that time period that you wrote?
You want me to read from the early period?
If you've got something like that nearby, and if not, we'll keep it.
Okay. All right. I have to. Let me get my poetry book.
Okay. So while she's getting that, we just want to remind the people who are watching and listening, we're speaking with Dr. Nubia Kai, Detroit born and bred poet and multi-genre writer, who is currently living in Washington, D.C. This is the third author talk of September, is Black Reading Month 2022. So we're talking to Nubia about her early history and her early development as a writer. And I asked her to share some of that early writing influenced by the Black arts movement as she was a young writer. And she just went to pull a book off the shelf. And I think momentarily we're going to hear something from her.
Okay, I'm trying to find a poem that I did around the time, because when I was telling you the influence of Abu Ashat, Abu and Sadiq and I were in a group called the Crescent Poets. And this is when we were, you know, going around reading, reading different venues around the city. I'm trying to see, it must be in the first book, Piece of My Mind. Let me see if I can find it.
Okay, so again, we're talking with Dr. Nubia Kai. We got a little break in the action. This session is dedicated to her good brother, my brother, Aaron Ibn Pori Pitts, who recently passed and was a cultural icon in Detroit, throughout this country and throughout the world. Sister Nubia is currently living in DC, but she still has very strong Detroit connections and is revered, certainly here in the city of Detroit. And I'm sure that folks who have gotten to know her in DC also revere her equally. While she's still looking for the poem, we'll just say that we have the 4th Black Reading Month Author Talk next Wednesday, September 28th. And the hosting duties for that are being shared by my brother, Michael Simanga. And he'll be talking to the 4th author, which I'll have to pull up the name in just a minute, forgive me. But Michael Simanga is also an accomplished writer and poet in his own right. Sister Nubia, you got that poem?
Yeah, I found it. I don't know how I missed it. It was in here where I thought it was. Okay, this is called, yes, it's kind of long. It's 3 parts to this piece. But this is one of the poems I wrote a very long time ago, maybe 1969. Yeah, 1969, 1970, something like that. It's called Theme, Eleanor, Rigby, and the Old Dead Virgins. Where did they come from, they ask. Strangled love, spurting eyes of a shadow, hollowness, an empty skull thrust between the pavements. Behind these doors, windows with feeling, flesh untouched by flesh, soft, slow beat of a shrunken heart. Where did they come from? Marching mannequins, living suicides in these towers, caves, darkened by their own sweat, or huddled alone with these ugly smells, dust on the fireplace, garbage under the sink, onions on the breath. From some thin shallowness, filthy waters where the whores throw their refuge, under a haunted tree where they dreamed of being complete, jogged, jilled at least once. She was about 40, a virgin, satisfied with her 7 cats and knitting kit. Every Sunday she went to church and thanked God. She read a lot and was an excellent cook. She also played the piano well. Chopin and Bach were her favorites. She was not a pretty woman, but she was kind and good. May she rest in peace. Still no remembrances, new seedlings to blossom from a closed womb or visible prints of a man's hand making the breast swell. These old photographs show no life. There's something missing in these faces, long polka dot dresses and flowered hats. No twinkle in these smiles, no swing to these hips. The nose sits trembling beneath a full moon. Space, nothing but space where figures should be, instead of brooms, pillows, sad organ music. Once, there was a man once, tall gentleman who lived down the road. He was a widower, had 4 children, all grown. He used to come visit every Saturday evening. She baked apple pie and they talked and played checkers and sang. She was about 35 then. She liked him a lot. One night, as he was leaving and they stood on the edge of her screened-in porch, he held her hand and moved his head forward as if to kiss her. But one of her cats suddenly scrambled after a field mice in the bushes. They were distracted, the impending kiss forgotten. A few months later, he got married to one of his daughter's friends. Ah, miss that one. Missed being missed. Moon and Venus did not accompany them. Several question marks left in the sand. Along these shores, shells hurled at the moon. The galaxies laugh with the reflections, stillness, the noise of tears. A handsome prince does not come on his white horse. Only the tiny flame from the candle burns. Only the narrow bones feel the touch of the wind, cooling all erotic thoughts. There was passion here. Behind these dry wrinkles was energy. Where did they come from? Gone. They never were. That's the first part, you know, because this is, like I say, there's 2 other poems. And I'll read it and maybe we'll get the whole part of it, because I'm looking at Eleanor Rigby from different angles, right? This next one is Eleanor Rigby reinvestigated for Abu. But perhaps she wasn't lonely or even alone with a breeze, a book, the words age, and who can question it in lunacy, sanity, because I think I'm a leaf, am I not one? Because I float in space where you stand watching, dictating how I should be. And though I lie naked next to a man, I am alone, dying. Perhaps in that stillness were messages, knowledge behind those windows where she stared. Maybe in those eyes were multitudes of lovers. Possibly she was completed when she played Bach. But if she wasn't, could she have missed what she never had? And then the last one is Eleanor Rigby as Prostitute. The song says, no one comes near. The frogs hiss in the meadows, clouds move eastwards. But they came when you winked at them. Running, they came, fleshmongers, students of masturbation, sweaty hands, fierce red eyes, a long ride for the money, the foul breath, doors bashed in, sailors, bank presidents, mailmen, they came when you winked at them. The epitaph read, she was not a moral woman, but she was kind and good. No one comes near. Who cares? They were all ugly.
Thank you.
So that's Eleanor Rigby. Remember that was a popular song.
Yeah, that was a Beatles song. And
yeah, Beatles song, and
people would have grown up in that time period to study the Beatles to really know what that reference was. But what it reminded me about is that in the Black arts movement, many symbols and icons from European culture were turned on their heads and used to express a language in another way. So I'm wondering, that was a pretty sophisticated poem for a young person to write. How did you hone your craft? Did you have other poets who critiqued you? Did you go to classes, workshops? How did you get to be such an excellent writer at such a young age.
Yeah, I didn't. I guess that was one of my better poems at that time. But actually, I was telling you, we were Crescent poets. We used to come together, and at the time, we were coming together practically every night and reading. You know, we were doing a lot of reading of other poets, but we were reading each other's poetry and critiquing the poetry. So they had a profound influence. Abu Ishaq and Sadiq Bey. And Sadiq was, I mean, wow, I think when I met him, he was around like 16 or 17. He was writing some incredible poetry. And I mean, I see that now with like a lot of the young slam poets. I always go to the youth poetry slams because these poets, 16, 17 years old, writing just some incredible stuff, you know, like a seasoned veteran writer in their 50s, but they're writing like that at, you know, 15 and 16. So you know, it's just, you know, so I didn't think I was even that advanced, but that was one of the better poems. I was maybe about 20, 21 when I did that poem, maybe 20. I think I was 20 when I wrote that. You know, so, but that poem, again, the subject matter, again, it was a song that I think was Vanilla Ice had a version of Eleanor Rigby, and it was really based on that. And I remember Abu used to play it all the time. And so, you know, again, you see how music can inspire you. And certainly the music at that time was some of the best, you know, coming out, you know, Coltrane and jazz, the avant-garde scene was just, that had a great influence on your thinking and transforming your thinking. So listening to music would inspire you to write. So
I wonder if you can dig a little deeper into that. How can listening to music transform your thinking? And also I'm wondering how music in general, but so-called jazz in particular, might have influenced the meter and the cadence within your poetry. How does it actually influence how you write and how you read your poetry?
Yeah, I think that point that you made, it definitely, I think it's the cadence and the rhythm of jazz. If you're listening to it, it naturally kind of comes into, you know, you naturally start writing with that same cadence, that same polyrhythm, you know. So I think the point that you make, the music is what really can really inspire you. You know, the same rhythms, the same, and you know, the same rhythms, the same cadence, the same tones that you hear in the jazz, you will hear it in the flow of the poetry. And then some of the jazz, like I say, I think jazz certainly had the most profound effect, but some of the poetry also, because it was so close to jazz, and especially with the new, what they call spoken word, it's taken poetry back to what it originally was, and that's performance. So to me, the spoken word writers, these young people, and even the hip hop poetry, it's just phenomenal stuff. And again, because they got that cadence and that rhythm and that performance aspect of it, it's just, I think they've taken it because, you know, a lot of the Black arts writers, they were trying to say, well, we want to get the poetry to where jazz is, right? Where it will have that same kind of impact, that emotional and spiritual impact. And I really think it has happened with the hip hop poetry and spoken word poetry and the young people that I hear, you know, who are out there now. Saul Williams, Jessica Care Moore from Detroit, Suni Patterson, and just it's so many others. They're really great, you know, spoken word artists.
So I don't know if you remember when we talked on Saturday, I told you that we're going to be a part of this interview that you couldn't prepare for when I was going to hit you with something out of left field. Remember that?
Okay.
Okay, here it comes.
Oh, do I jog? No.
No. So
Okay.
this is a speed round. You can just respond to these however you see fit. You ready?
Okay. All right.
Okay. Dorothy Ashby or Alice Coltrane?
Alice Coltrane. But I like Dorothy Ashby too, though. I like
Okay.
Dorothy Ashby, but
Second question.
yeah.
Leon Thomas or Andy Bay?
Andy Bay.
Okay, third question.
Andrew
Zora
Blank.
Neale Hurston or Alice Walker?
Yeah, that's a hard one there. Zora Neale Hurston.
Thank you so much for
But,
going
but,
along.
but I love both of them. Yeah, I love both.
And of course, you know, that's kind of a false dichotomy to ask you to choose between these greats because they all had great qualities. But I have one more question. And actually,
Mhm.
this question may determine whether or not we continue to be friends and comrades in the future, Nubia. And that
Oh,
question
really?
is, yes, this is the most important question. Does sugar belong in grits?
Well, I use honey. So I use honey, but I mean, and it depends on what kind of grits you're doing. You know, I used to eat grits as a kid. They put sugar and butter and milk. But then there's the shrimp and grits, you know, food. This is delicious that doesn't have sugar. So
So
it depends on how you fix it.
you know, there's a big debate in the Black internet world about whether or not sugar goes on grits. So
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
this is the raging debate in the Black world today.
Oh, wow.
So thank you, Nubia. So, you know, also when we talked a couple of weeks ago, you shared something with me that was fascinating. And so you write in all these different genres. You started out with poetry, then you talked about how you wrote a novella, then you wrote a novel, then you've written this epic. So it reminded me kind of of scaffolding. I wonder if you could talk about this process of how you have developed yourself as a writer using these various genres as kind of a stepping ladder.
Yeah, okay. Well, started with poetry, and I guess I can say my first love was poetry. And but I hadn't done, and I maybe had started doing some drama, like short one act plays. But I knew I wanted to do a novel, and I knew I wanted to do a large novel about the Maroon tradition in the United States, but I hadn't done any writing, any fiction writing at that point. So I started out like writing short stories, you know, like really short stories, and then the stories got longer. Then I went to the novella. Again, extended novel, development of characterism. And then I went to the long novel after I did the novella, you know, but that it took some years, maybe 5-6 years for me to get to the point where I was ready to work on this kind of epic novel. And when I finished the novel, initially it was like 1,000 pages long. So, I mean, a lot of the time the editing was cutting it down. So that was the process. You know, I knew that I needed to work up to the point where I could write a novel. So I started, like I said, in stages, the short story, novella, and then the novel. And then because it's a historical novel, it involved a lot of research. So I also had started doing research for it before I actually started writing it. And so there is some things I would like to read from the novel.
Yes, let's hear that.
Okay, this novel is again about, it's called I Spread My Wings and I Fly. It's a historical novel about the Maroons in the United States. And of course, most of us didn't even know that there were Maroons in the United States. We hear about the Maroons in Jamaica, Suriname, Brazil, and other places in the Caribbean and South America, but they actually had Maroon communities here that were just as powerful, just as long-standing and formidable as the Maroon communities in Brazil and Jamaica and Suriname and elsewhere. But but the novel, I mean, it's centered on the Maroons, but again, a lot of what's taking place is taking place on the plantation. It's also a large plantation. You also see the smaller farms. So you're looking at, you know, various environments within this chattel slavery system. So in this case, I'm just going to read a section from, it's a minor character that works in the house and who had used to be work in the field, used to be a field hand. And people kind of think that, okay, we're working in the house, you're not, driven so hard and it's not as bad, but it can really be worse because you have to deal with the whims of the slave owners all the time. You can never be yourself. So he's kind of expressing this in this passage. So here is Chester is set on the main part of the novel, set on a large sugarcane plantation in southern Louisiana. So he's again waiting. He's like a valet now, waiting on the slave owner. "Thank you, Chester," he mumbled, his fluttering eyes challenging the sightless sandbags. "You're a good boy, and the Lord's gonna bless you for it. May even get to wait on me in the white man's heaven." Chester grinned and knelt on his strong calves as he pulled off Hollyfield's boots. He began massaging the right Achilles heel. "Ah, that feels good. Seems like when my feet feel good, my whole body feels good," said Hollyfield. Chester removed Hollyfield's socks, ran his hands along the sole and in between the pale arthritic toes of his right foot. Gripping the heel, he twisted the upper part of the foot around in a circle. Wait on him in the white man's heaven. Thought he was already waiting on him in the white man's heaven. And if a nigger's heaven wasn't nothing but serving white folks again, then he'd rather have the worms eat him and never rise to see the sun or hear the mockingbird's liquid song or leaves flapping in the breeze, shaking off the dew, or steamboats plowing upstream, calling to mind a new and better day. He just begged the Lord to let him stay in the tomb and rest his broke down body. White folks sure think niggas is fools if they think niggas is looking for to serve them in heaven. Nigger heaven ain't got nothing to do with no white folks. They the fools, but that's what they think. Milkweed head motherfucker. Hollyfield's eyes were closed and his mouth hung open. Chester cut a hateful look at him. The gall of some folks was harder than a sledgehammer. Eyes closed, wasn't nothing in them to see with. Nothing but hard blue dots that hid the mystery of life. No color, no substance to the pale, soft feet. How could they have traveled across the land and made big holes in the earth with such weak feet? He'd wonder about them feet and the greed that pushed them around, sucking the blood from the earth. White man wasn't nothing but a mosquito. Had to suck the living sap in a man for life. Couldn't live without taking a man's blood. Never could rightly understand why a nigger was damned, because his skin was black and solid and tough as a mule's hide. Nigger just had to accept it. Wasn't nothing else he could do but work himself half to death to keep the other half alive. Didn't believe in no angels coming blowing bugles after no niggas, not after God put his curse on him. He stared at his dark skin, ashamed and feeling a pain in his heart deeper than the sting of the lash. It always hurt to think that what he was could never change lest he died. Could nothing on God's earth make him white except his ashes after they cooled from the burning eyes of white men? Wouldn't nothing change for him? Wasn't nothing for a nigger but being dumb and deaf to his misery? Wasn't never gonna change. Nothing could break the curse of God but his mercy. Chester tilted his head to the side and started stroking Hollyfield's left foot, sighing inside himself so the master didn't hear and crying, but he didn't let the master see no tears coming out. He'd catch hell if he did. White folks didn't like niggas showing no feelings except a hog swallowing up his own youngin'. Mean mistresses, hard drivers, haughty half-breeds, and footstools like him that never had nothing. No woman, no youngins, no mammy and pappy that he ever knew about. Nothing but a pulpy white foot that smelled bad as old fungus rags kept too long in armoires. No land but what his hands had touched in the rich red soil full of vigor and peace. It was lots better in the sun. It was lots better than being a footstool and a fool sliding around grinning all the time like it was something worth grinning about with your head and a wildcat's mouth. It was better in the fields. Didn't have to play at loving no man while he whipping on your black hide and working you till you can't sweat no more. To be a loving, grinning ass. Hell, even asses get tired and refuse to move. And if the master lash or shoot him in the head, don't matter at all. There was niggas and there was mules to do the work of the world, but a mule had more sense than a nigga any day. Sense enough to demand some victuals and rest when he needed it. Niggas too scared to do nothing but cow down like some creature that ain't even of this earth. Brad Bush got sense enough to keep his thorns. Niggas been tricked. Niggas been tricked out of their senses. They don't know what a pen is for, don't know how they got in or how they gonna get out. So they just stay put like a circle of stones marking a grave, a death they ain't rightly remembered or forgot when the white man first fell into their souls and ate them.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
You know, I had never considered that, the way you framed that perhaps being a house Negro is more, tears you up more than being a field Negro. You know, I had never really considered that.
Oh yeah.
And I'm wondering what the implications I'd have for that today, for the house Negroes that we still have. I wonder, are they torn like that, or have they made peace with their house Negro-ness?
Yes, yes.
So Nubia, so that's a piece of historical fiction, and I wonder if you can talk about historical fiction as a genre. And I'll preface it by saying that as a young revolutionary, or trying to be revolutionary as a young person, mostly what I read was history. I read Malcolm X, I read, Kwame Nkrumah, I read, these kind of historical books. But then later I started learning about the importance of fiction. So I'm wondering if you can share, what is the importance of historical fiction in having a more comprehensive understanding of our culture?
History. Yes, well, there's this saying that with historical fiction, historical novels, the events didn't happen, but the story is true. So we're dealing with true stories, right? But you may change the names, you might change the names, but the situations reflect what things that are really happening. But the benefit of looking at something through the lens of that, you're using the metaphors, the symbols, the imagery is what engages the reader or the audience on multiple levels, right? So you're engaged spiritually, you're engaged psychologically, you're engaged emotionally in what's going on, right? Because you're seeing it in a living, dramatic context, right? You're seeing it in a living, dramatic context rather than just an expository writing. So now you're getting into understanding the characters, all right, who were living in this particular time under these circumstances. You're getting insight to their personality. You're getting insight to the people's belief system. You're getting insight into their worldview. You're getting insight to their morals and principles. So you're seeing them far more holistically when you're looking at it from that, from the point of view of a novel or play, right? You're seeing the whole character, the whole picture. All right, so that's the benefits. And a lot of the history, they're only talking about the people at the top, like the presidents or the kings, and you learn a little bit about their life, but you have no idea what the people are like. All right, the people living at the particular age. So really, when you think about it, that's a lot of even the knowledge we have of history comes through plays, because you have plays and novels, a lot of the historical stuff. And I would also say that in African historiography, they use these aesthetic forms to tell the story because they know it has more of a transformative effect. All right, this is what transforms consciousness. When you can put the history in a story form, right? That's going to have far more of a transformative effect than just reading an expository history. So in African history telling, they use a story form, right? They'll use poetry, they'll use drama, right? They use like a story, they'll use music to also to tell the story. They'll use masquerade. You have all of these different things coming together, and this enhances your understanding, all right, of what was going on and transforms your understanding of what's happening, transforms your consciousness. And so they very purposely, and another reason as well is they use the spoken word because there's a certain energy that comes from the spoken word. I mean, reading was fine, and they had written text, but they still preferred, say, to explicate history orally or dramatically through a drama or through music, because it emits something that they call in the Mandinka culture inyama. Inyama means a vital force, and there's more vital force that's expressed through through the spoken word, through the breath, right? Through the breath and fire, earth, air, and water. So you're getting the energy, more of the energy, all right, through the spoken word than a written word.
Okay, we have a couple of questions, and I'm going to go back to some questions I have. Sister Muriel Shillingford, Mama Falashade, as many of us know about, says, in your opinion, what is your opinion of The Woman King? Have you seen that movie, or do you know anything about it? This came out?
I haven't seen it yet. I haven't seen it. So, I mean, I heard of the Amazons, of course, of Dahomey, and it seems that this story is, you know, looking at it from a different angle, because I hadn't heard of a warrior king among the Dahomeans in Benin. So, you know, I'm looking forward to seeing it, but I haven't seen it yet. So I don't want to just go by what I'm hearing. You know, I'm hearing different things though.
Okay, the next question is by somebody you might know, somebody named Malia Salam. And she says, this is Nubia's daughter.
Okay.
For those who don't know. She says, it's the end of time. All of your writings, including your poetry, plays, novels, and essays, are on a sinking boat, and you can only save 3 of the works you have ever created. Which 3 will you select in order of importance, and why?
If I was on a sinking boat,
you can only save 3 of your many writings. Which 3 do you save, and why?
Well, the first one would be I Spread My Wings and I Fly, because I think that there's the history that it's exposing is just not known. I think it's very important that we know this history, and it's something that's certainly not taught in school. And again, something that even a lot of historians don't even know that the Maroons were in the United States. So I think that's an important book. I also think it's important because of the quality of the writing. It's, you know, I'm getting really, those people who have read this book have really given it high praise because of the quality and also, again, the content. That would be one. The other one is something I'm working on now. I haven't finished it, The Sacred History of African Americans. Again, looking at history, but more through the eyes of the position of African historiography, through the lens, I should say, of African historiography and African history, using scripture, using myth, using art, more or less to explain the history. So that would be the other one, The Sacred History of African Americans, I Spread My Wings and I Fly, and possibly the one I'm working on now, the novel about the Black movement, especially the Black movement in Detroit. You know, the Black Panthers, Republic of New Africa, League Revolutionary Black Workers Congress, various organizations that, you know, you had in the 1960s and 70s, the Bay family, the cultural nationalist groups. So that would be the third one, which again, I'm still working on them.
So Alice Walker talked about kind of the influence of certain places on your writing. And I know that that's a technique that you use. You actually go to places to kind of absorb the energy, the lingering energy of the places that you're writing about. I wonder if you could talk about that.
Yeah, yeah, that is something. You know, they say that the walls have ears, and for example, when people go to the slave castles or slave houses on the coast of Africa, Dory Island or Elmina or Cape Coast Castle, you can feel the energy. You can feel the energy of that place. You know, the thousands or even millions that came through, and the despair, the grief. You feel it, and when you come in there, that's why people, they feel it and they start crying and weeping. You know, because they're feeling the energy of that place. There's just something in certain things, like, for example, in Harper's Ferry, I went to Harper's Ferry. I was writing about Blacks during the Civil War, and actually going to the places, it's like something in the atmosphere, in the environment, I'm sorry, that speaks to you. They have something that they call witness trees. The witness trees are the trees that were there when, for example, the raid at Harper's Ferry took place. So the witness trees are, in other words, these trees were there at the time when this historical event took place, and they call it witness trees. And it is like, it's a witness because now they're being witness to you of what happened. So, I mean, it's hard to explain, but it's something that is left, some energy or force field that's left in certain places, in certain, places, especially where something heavy really took place. So I could feel it. And I went to Gettysburg. I went to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Even though there were no Blacks working in that regiment, there was an incident where the Confederates had come up maybe 2 weeks prior to the actual battle of Gettysburg, and were stealing and kidnapping free Black people in that region, stealing and then taking them into the South. And that was a story that was never told, when you talk about Gettysburg. In fact, Black people in Gettysburg are trying to get a museum. So that was something else I was able to learn about just from going and being there. So that's another thing you'll see a lot when you go to places about the local history. It might be contained in archives and places that you wouldn't have found elsewhere. So it's, going to the places is always a good thing. So Maroon visited Louisiana. And so I was listening to Southern dialect. I was dealing with the dialect. It was more of an Alabama, Mississippi dialect. And when I actually went to Louisiana, I could tell that the dialect was totally different in Louisiana. And then not only that, you should get to deal with the dialect that was used in the 19th century rather than the 20th century. So I'm hearing a different dialect that sounds more like a Gullah Geechee sound. So I was already 300 pages into the novel, and I had to change the whole dialect. I had to change it because the dialect was different. And not only, again, the 20th century, I had to go back and actually look at texts that could show me what the dialect was like in the 19th century in Louisiana. And again, that was something I needed to go there to do, and to actually hear the dialect, and hear a lot of the local stories, like Marie Laveau, who was another great leader and great hero. But we don't really know that much about her because she was a very, very powerful voodoo queen. But I'm sorry, Marie Laveau they told me that Marie Laveau was an incarnation of Isis or Aset. That's what they consider her to be. When you look at all the things that she did, she was like an incarnation of some powerful, powerful woman. And not only that New Orleans itself corresponded to the city of Abydos, because there's this thing about the largest river in any country has some kind of connection with the Nile. with the Nile River. So you can see different cities that would correspond to the cities that are along the Nile. So they said that New Orleans was the same as Abydos. It had the same energy field as Abydos. And of course, Abydos was the place where Asar and Aset were worshipped. That was the main city in which the temples of Asar were. So that was something, again, I don't think I would have gotten, just staying in Detroit and writing it. I had to go to the place.
So Nubia, I don't know if you remember this, but in 1995, I was on my way to Ghana and I had a layover in Senegal, and you were coming back, I think, from Mali, and we happened to meet in the airport. So applying what you're saying about going to places in order to absorb the energy, you wrote about Sundiata Keita, and you actually went to Mali. One of the things I remember you telling me about your trip to Mali is about the various African scripts that existed. We often think about writing as just being a European thing or an Arabic thing. So I'm wondering if you can talk about those two things, the impact of going to Mali in your writings on Sundiata Keita, and also the various African scripts that you have, I don't want to say discovered, but you have made us aware of, I'll say that.
Yeah, yes. Mali is, again, a center with a lot of history. And I think when I saw you in 95, I think that might have been the second time I had gone to Mali. I first went in 1987. And when I went that time, I started collecting, doing interviews with jellies or griots, what they call it, we say griots. I started doing these interviews. I didn't have intentions of doing a dissertation necessarily, but I just did it because I was interested in it. So when I went back in 95, I was doing the same thing. I was collecting, doing interviews with griots about the history of the Mali Empire. And so later on, when I decided to work on my PhD, I already had collected a lot of the information, on Sundiata and the formation of the Mali Empire. And so that's how I ended up, going and doing the dissertation. One of the things, and I interviewed a number of jellies, and each jelly, it's similar history. You always learn something different from each one. And also there are written texts. Again, the Tariq al-Fatash and the Tariq al-Sudan. These are kind of better known texts that were preserved because when the French came, they started confiscating a lot of these written texts. In fact, I remember one of my sheikhs, Sheikh Hassan Sisi of Senegal, was telling me that they had like 5,000 books that they had taken out of Mali and out of Senegal in the Sorbonne, in the basement of the Sorbonne. But really, they took a lot more than that. So that's why you had this rush to hide a lot of these texts that the French were taking and confiscating. So people started burying them in wells, they started burying them in their houses, they started putting them in caves. And it really was just recently, maybe about 10, 12, 15 years ago, that they started bringing these texts back. And now, you have all this war that's going on in Mali, where people they finally exhumed and taking these texts out, and now they have to hide them again because they're taking these texts because they're worth a lot of money. They're worth a lot of money. But actually, at the Library of Congress, they have online a lot of these, a lot of the texts that were in that. I think it's over 100,000 documents. But the thing is, a lot of them, they haven't been translated. And some of them are in like Soninke script. A lot of people, very few people are familiar with Soninke script. And then this whole idea about Africans not having written scripts is just not the case. Almost every group, every African group has a writing system, but it's just that in many cases, the writing system is only known by maybe a certain family or a certain lineage or a certain society, like a secret society, instead of it being taught universally to everybody. That's the situation you have because the Bantu speaking peoples, we learn from Vasamazulu Credo Mukwa, that the Bantu-speaking peoples who take up over half of Africa have a written system that's similar to, and he even shows it in his book. It's done in a script that's kind of similar to the Chinese script. It's like part like hieroglyphic and part symbol. And this is something that's known, but mainly the Songomas, it's just certain people learn these scripts, all right? You had the Soninke script, the Kikuyu had the script, the Cameroons, the Nsiribi, which our brother Ibn used to use those Nsiribi symbols, right? That was another script. You had Amharic and Ge'ez and Arabic. Arabic is an African script. When we get back into our heads, who again, where that language came from and who the people were who developed that language, that is really an African script. Aramaic was a script that was developed by the Persians. The Persians look like you, Malik, your complexion with the woolly hair. When you look at the murals of Persians in Persepolis and the other major capitals, major cities of ancient Persia, you see Black people with hair, with kinky hair. They look very much like Egyptians. The Aramaic script is also an African script. So there's abundance of African script. You have the Mandinka had their own script, which is also called the Vai script. So the Mandinka, the Soninke, the Bantu speaking peoples, the Ethiopians, the Amharic script, the Ge'ez script, the Nubians had they had their own script. Well, of course, we know the Kemetic script, right? The hieroglyphics, and then they had the Hieratic and Demotic script. So there's scripts all over Africa. It's not just an oral society. But like I said, they did understand the value in the spoken word because of the energy that's emitted through the spoken word. And that's why they will still use the spoken word.
Thank you. So we have about 4 or 5 questions in the chat that I want to try to get to in the next 7 minutes or so. So I'm going to ask if you can give brief answers to these questions. Sister Lacey Dawson, who's in Detroit, says it seems that the system of education is under attack, and especially arts and culture. What recommendations do you give to parents on how to expose their children and themselves to writing and poetry, as some of our school systems seem to neglect these arts?
Yes, I think that one of the things we need to do is to support independent Black schools, and try and create more independent Black schools so that we can teach our children the things that they're not critical race theory, historical strategy to undermine the true teaching of American history. I don't know why there's not more of an outcry about this critical race theory, the racism in, again, these attacks. But I would say that that's another thing that we need to do. We need to get organized, and they say, like, join the school board. We need to join the school boards, all right? So we can have, make decisions too. They're talking about, well, we need to stop teaching this if it makes people uncomfortable. What people are they talking about? And in history, I would say that's what history is supposed to do. If it makes you uncomfortable, there's a reason why it makes you uncomfortable. If it makes you feel guilty, if it makes you feel sad, makes you feel happy, makes you feel pride, that's what history is. It's supposed to do that, because if it doesn't, how is it gonna cause you to change your behavior, to change your actions, right? So if you don't learn from history, you will repeat it. So it's very important, and feeling uncomfortable is not a bad thing. It doesn't have to be a bad thing.
Sister Ruhi Marshall says, what has been your most challenging work and why?
The most challenging work in terms of writing?
Yes.
In terms of writing, yeah, okay. The most challenging work for me, at least, and I'm thinking of the novel that I did, this historical novel, was the dialect, getting the dialect. Like I said, when I had to change the whole thing after I was 300 pages into it, but then even again, having to go and find the dialect from the 19th century, and one that was authentic, because you have, it's almost like a caricature black dialect that you'll see, right, in different texts. So that was the hardest part, you know, and I still don't know if I have that right, you know, because then you also had people coming from different parts of the United States that had different dialects. So everybody doesn't have the same dialect, but you have like a Louisianian dialect. But then I had to deal with people who were coming from Virginia, or people who were coming from South Carolina who had a different dialect. So that was the hardest part, is getting that dialect right.
Okay, I'm going to try to get 2 questions in. We have just a couple minutes left. Sister Shoshana in Detroit says, Sister Nubia, what inspires you to write, and what should revolutionary writers include in their repertoire of writing? And then our good sister Malika in Sodoma says, please expound on the role of the artist in forwarding knowledge of the contributions, history, and culture of Black people. 2 similar questions, and we'll end on your answer to those questions.
Okay. Yeah, I think the role of the artist, Shirley Graham Du Bois said, we are a race of artists, and what are we going to do about it? And I think she was saying that, even implying that there's something that has to be done if you have this gift, or if you have this talent, and that is, you have to try and use it to liberate your people, you know, to liberate the mind, decolonize the mind, and elevate the consciousness of the people so that they will be motivated to change their condition, to change to lift and up these veils and walls of oppression, right? So that's, to me, that's what the artist is supposed to do. The art itself, the word art supposedly means to make live, to make something animate, to make live. And so in a sense, the artist is like, is something like a shaman or a healer in that sense, right? Because you're infusing this like new life force that's an enlightening force in the minds and the souls of the people. Yeah, so I think that we have a duty as revolutionaries. In fact, to me, the art and the revolutionary consciousness kind of comes hand in hand. At least, again, especially through the Black arts movement, it was always, that was kind of the Black aesthetic, all right, over the Black arts movement, that we're using our art to bring about revolutionary change within the Black world, not just the United States, but within the entire world.
So Sister Nubia, if people are interested in getting your books, how can they get your books? And if people are interested in contacting you, how can they do that?
Okay, well, they can get the book on Amazon.com, right? I guess that's the easiest way for most people. But I also have a website, and it's Kuma, K-U-M-A press.org. I think you can get it there. The Charles Wright Museum and Nandi's was carrying the book. I don't know if they still have it, but those are places that you can ask if you happen to be there. So those are the main sources. And if you want to reach me, you can feel free to email me at Nubia Kai, N-U-B-I-A-K-A-I @verizon.net.
Okay, and I want to thank you so much, Nubia. I've been inspired by you for decades, and I continue to be inspired by you. You are an intellectual genius. We are so enhanced by having you as part of our community. Thank you for sharing with us this evening.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I also want to thank Sister Nzele, who's been handling things behind the scene. And I want to thank all of you who joined this webinar, as well as those who'll be watching this on YouTube and Facebook once this is posted. And we want to encourage you, you're going to get all those who participated, you'll get an email after this that will include the link so that you can share that link to those who didn't see this today. Also, Sister Thea Simmons says, don't forget Source Booksellers in Detroit. They also carry Mama Nubia's book. So we want to, again, thank you so much, Nubia, and we want to invite folks to join us next week for the fourth and final Black Reading Month Author Talk for this year. And that will be hosted by my brother, Michael Simanga. He'll be talking to Sister Farah Jasmine Griffin. And that will start also 7 o'clock next Wednesday, the 28th. You'll need to pre-register for that as you did for this webinar tonight. So Sister Nubia, thank you again so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you to the participants.